hanging on this Friday. Appreciate it. Hit the like button if you could, folks. All right. So, Tone, the offensive numbers for the Eagles last year, they're okay. I mean, they're certainly not where the defensive numbers were terrible. So 25 points per game, about 25 and a half, which is the 7th best in football. Certainly solid. 16th in the passing game. You know, the running game started off hot and then kind of cooled a little bit. The numbers they're okay generally. But we know by watching this team, by what we saw the year before and how good they were, how effective they were, how much they dictated the game to the other team, how much the other team was on their toes, guessing at what they were doing, and how much this year looked like the team already had the game plan figured out that they were playing a lot, right? They kind of knew what to expect, to the point where even Nick Sirianni after the season called it stale, the game plan. Players themselves, like Lane Johnson, said, you know, team studied the film. They knew what we were going to be doing. So there was a lot going on there. So the question begs, with Nick coming back, we know that Jalen's not going anywhere. First year of that $250 million deal. Do you think there's trust still there? Do you think there's belief? And I'm going to ask it from Jalen's standpoint to Nick, not Nick to Jalen. Do you think that Jalen is still a believer in Nick in your estimation? And if not, when did it go away?
You know, that's a hell of a question, Rob, because, you know, I'm over here looking at, you know, some of Jalen Hurts' advanced passing stats, you know, when it comes to play type, right? You know, he really thrived in that RPO. He really thrived with the RPOs in 2022. In 2022, he had 148 RPO plays called for him. In 2023, he had 116. That's a 32 play discrepancy, right? Through those and now listen to this. This is where things get really interesting. Through those 148 plays that were RPOs that were called for, it accounted for just over 1,100 yards. Just over 1,100 yards. That's passing yards, that's rushing yards, but mainly most of it was passing yards. Right. Over 1,000 of his RPO plays accounted for over 1,000 passing yards, right? In 2023, 116 RPO plays called only accounted for 582 total yards. 498 passing yards. 89 pass attempts to 122 pass attempts in 2022. So again, Jalen Hurts' production in the RPO significantly diminished. On top of that, the opportunities diminished as well. So when I think about it from that perspective, this is what I take from it. They weren't giving him as many opportunities in the RPO, meaning they wanted to cut it down, meaning they didn't want him they didn't want him putting himself at risk, right? So that's one. Number two, I think the league caught up to what they were doing.
Yes. It's not as simple as they were trying to be more conservative with him from a health perspective. It was also like they read it. They realized
they knew what was going to happen.
They had an off season to really dive into this thing and figure out what the looks were.
Again, you had over 1,000 passing yards from the RPO. Yeah, that accounted for 33% of Jalen Hurts' passing production in 2022. In 2023, only 498 passing yards made by way of the RPO. If we're doing some math here, 498 RPO passing yards divided by Jalen Hurts' total passing yards, which were just over 3,800, 3,858 to be exact. Only 13% of Jalen Hurts' passing yards came by way of the RPO. Whereas though in 2022, like I said, I gave you a rough estimate of 33%. That's insane. That's north of 20. That's north of 20% of a drop off in terms of his RPO production. Yeah, the league caught up, and Nick Sirianni and that offensive staff didn't do enough when it came to evolving and being more creative with the RPO. So I say all that to say, I think Jalen Hurts' trust in Nick Sirianni has diminished. Now, has it all been lost? Maybe not, right? Because I personally believe trust isn't something that's black and white. I think
it can be regained.
Maybe.
Okay. Well, what do you mean then? I'm sorry. What do you mean?
No, you're right. If I'm saying trust can be lost, trust can also be regained, right?
Okay.
Especially if I'm saying it's fluid. Here's the thing. Sometimes when you see a large enough sample size of someone, you say to yourselves, "Oh no, they don't have the answers. They can't figure this out." Because again, this wasn't just something that just popped up on Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni. This was a progression throughout the season.
Yeah.
And I bet any amount of money Jalen Hurts was looking to his coach for answers. Okay, they're seeing this coming. What do you got for me, Nick? What do you got for me, Brian? Over an 8-week decline, over an 8-week span, we saw this offense become a shell of itself. We saw Jalen Hurts' skill set become damn near obsolete. We saw guys in the passing game unable to get open.
Yeah.
They were unable to move the chain, unable to sustain drives, however you want to slice it. So I think the trust between Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts, more so the trust that Jalen Hurts has in Nick Sirianni, diminished. Because when you have a coach that can't give you answers or provide any sort of counter to what defenses are doing to you guys, it's kind of hard to look beyond that and say, yeah, I think this guy can figure it out, because you had 8 weeks to do it. Again, on top of that, 4 of those weeks were against lesser opponents.
Right. All right. Here's where I'm at. And you make a really good case with everything. Where I'm torn on two fronts. How much of it was Brian Johnson? How much can we put on the fact that you made 2 mistakes with your coordinators? And I find that one harder, like not quite as plausible, because Nick schemed it up.
Mm-hmm. It was his game plan, remember?
Yeah,
he kept saying that.
He wants to tell us that all the time, right? So that's why I'm having a little bit more of a hard time with that. And then the other part of it is, how much of it was something that Jalen maybe checked to, or how much of it was, hey, the play was there, but he held the ball too long in the pocket. He had sort of the Wentz, syndrome, if you will, where you're just, you got to have that clock, and the clock wasn't fast enough in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not giving you like the defense of Nick. I'm just saying, when I try to hash all of this out with the offense, allotting the blame to me is interesting, because I've had a lot of people tell me, listen, man, the plays that were called weren't all that bad. The quarterback just needs to execute them better than he did.
That's interesting, and I think that's a very good point. I think Jalen Hurts does have to be better in his role, right?
Yeah.
And again, right, the last thing I want to do is pretend Jalen Hurts isn't culpable of anything that went wrong. Yeah. That's the last thing I want to imply. He definitely has to carry, and he turned the ball over 19 times.
Yeah.
19 times this season he made bad decisions, or he didn't secure the ball enough, right? Mm-hmm. Let me take it a step further for you, right? This isn't just the RPO game, the play action game as well, which relies heavily on what? The running game to be successful.
Yeah.
In 2022, the Eagles had 133 pass attempts that were play action plays. 133 pass attempts in 2022 that were passing plays, right?
Mm-hmm.
In 2022, their 133 play action attempts accounted for 1,094 passing yards. Again, 1,094 passing yards. That's about 30 to 33% of Jalen Hurts' passing production, just how the RPO was. In 2023, the Philadelphia Eagles had only 81 play action pass attempts. That's a 52 play discrepancy. Mm-hmm. In 2023, those 81 play action pass attempts only accounted for 646 passing yards.
Yeesh.
The Eagles were inept in their RPO game. They were inept in their play action game. What do those two categories rely heavily on in order to be successful? Mm-hmm. The running game.
Yes.
People like to say the Eagles upgraded that running back. And I liked DeAndre Swift throughout the season. I felt like he didn't get the ball enough. Mm-hmm. But based off of these numbers and how it affected the passing game, the Philadelphia Eagles regressed as a running team. It's no ifs, ands, buts about it.
Yeah.
They were unable to get any push. They were unable to sustain drives with the running game. They couldn't rely on it in any way, or they chose not to rely on it, which then evolved into them not being able to do it at all.
Right. And to just while you're on that for a minute, there's no, to me, better example, whether this is Nick or Brian Johnson, of just not getting it. The Tampa game, the playoff game. You didn't have AJ Brown, number one, which is a huge thing.
Mhm.
Jalen's got the messed up finger where, remember, we go through the whole pregame thing where he's got the glove on, the glove's off, it's taped up, blah, blah, blah. And Tampa wasn't all that good of late against the run at that point. I mean, it was beyond belief to me that they didn't try to hammer the ball more in that, especially in that game. It just makes no sense at all.
Yes. And I want to do some more math with you, Rob, if that's all right, because I think what we're doing here is we're really getting deep into the nitty gritty of Jalen Hurts' production and what makes him successful. So listen to this. In 2022, Jalen Hurts, like I said, 1,068 passing yards from the RPO.
Yeah.
1,194 yards from the play action. That's 2,162 yards, right? Passing. Jalen Hurts threw for 3,700 passing yards in 2022.
That was only in what, 3 less games, right? 2 less games. Anyway, I got
just 2 less games, right?
Mm-hmm.
2 less games. So I say all that to say 2,162 of his passing yards came from the RPO and the play action.
Yep.
If you divide that by his total passing yards so you can get the percentage of those plays, 58% of Jalen Hurts' passing production came from the RPO and play action. 58%.
Yeah.
Now,
a lot of production there.
Now let's go into 2023, right?
Yeah.
646 play action yards plus 498 RPO yards. That's 1,144 passing yards via the RPO and the play action. You divide that by his total passing yards in 2023, which was 3,858 yards. That accounts for only 29% of Jalen Hurts' passing production. So when it comes to the RPO and the play action, even on top of that, he had more pass attempts in 2023. He had about 70 or 75 more pass attempts. So again, his RPO and play action production went from accounting for 58% of his total production to 29% of his total production. The Philadelphia Eagles had no running game in 2023. And we need to be honest about that. Based off of Jalen Hurts' passing numbers, and he's a quarterback that relies on the RPO, that relies on the play action, right? He's a dual threat guy.
Yeah.
He didn't run for as many attempts. He didn't run for as many yards. DeAndre Swift didn't have the running yards that Miles Sanders had last year. The entire Eagles running game from last year to this year is night and day. His production plummeted in the passing game because the Eagles could not get the running game going because they rely on the RPO, because they rely on the play action.
Yeah,
they had to do a better job of putting him in position to be successful.
Tone, do you know the last game that DeAndre Swift ran for 100 yards was in the season?
Week 3? Week 4?
Week 3 against Tampa Bay. He rushed for 175 against Minnesota week 2, 130 the next week, and didn't get over 100 after that. He got 92 against the Giants in that game on Christmas, right? But, not good. Not good.
But here's the sad part about it. When you saw that you were able to get that running game going with Swift with Swift, in weeks 2, week 3, or whatever, when you saw that, you should have said, "Oh, okay, we got to feed him more."
Yeah.
It's going to provide balance. The Eagles' offense wasn't nowhere near as balanced as they were in 2022.
Yeah.
Their RPO game wasn't as productive. People caught up with it. They need to be more creative with that. Their play action game suffered tremendously because they couldn't run the ball. Teams weren't biting on your play action. Teams didn't think you could do it. Also, the attempts in general went down. So they got away from because the numbers indicate they got away from the play action and got away from the RPO. That also implies they got away from the running game.
Yeah.
This Philadelphia Eagles team needs to establish who they want to be. And they need to lean in hard into who they are, especially on offense. This team thrives in the play action. They thrive in the RPO. Your quarterback thrives in those scenarios. How creative can Kellen Moore be? when it comes to putting Jalen Hurts in the positions for him to be successful. How much can Jalen Hurts develop as a quarterback so maybe he doesn't have to rely so heavily on the RPO to be successful? But then again, we ask ourselves, what is the most optimal version of Jalen Hurts? And I feel like we're still figuring that out.
I think so too. And I think in fairness, with him, I don't know how much went on. Even you're never going to see it because he's a great poker player. But with some of the stuff that maybe Joe Santoliquito wrote about, how much of a distraction is probably the wrong word, but like the changes when you sign that big contract, what that does for you, what that does to you that first year, the time constraints that you had where you couldn't work on your game maybe as much. I think all of those things are something that Jalen has to figure out and realize, all right, that didn't work for me last year. This worked for me. I got to do this. I got to do that. We all know that he could probably be a little bit more vocal. I don't think he gets I don't want him to be out of character for who he is, but could be a little bit more vocal and hey, let's just grab a bite to eat, guys. Yeah, he could do that kind of stuff better.
Yeah.
And I think maybe all of those little things add up to a big thing. But you're right. More than anything else, they have got to figure out how to play to his strengths, do what works best for him, while also making sure that he improves on some things that any NFL quarterback's going to have to do. That just basic stuff. You got to get the ball out quicker. Take what's given you. But I also think too, this is just my theory, that I say it because of when Brian Johnson was asked the question point blank, what needs to happen with this offense? We got to get more chunk plays. I know every NFL team wants chunk plays, but last year was an issue with them throwing the ball deep too much and not taking what was given. So I think they got to get
their downfield game wasn't nowhere near as productive. You're right.
Yeah. And just hey man, look, let's make your life easier. You don't have to make the low percentage, deep shot throw. Dallas Goedert standing there in the flat, zip, get it out.
Let him make a play. He gets paid millions of dollars for them to make them plays. Let him make a play. Trust the guys in the flat. Trust the shallow crossers.
Yeah, and the other thing that the Seattle game, we all go back to that game because that's when they said they ad-libbed. I get that players are going to audible, that sometimes you're going to do things a little bit, out of the norm and all that. But that was also a way of saying, like, they're not really believing in what's coming in, from the sideline. And that told you loud and clear that was the case.
Yep, and I think earlier in this segment you asked me, when did it happen? When did the mutiny occur?
Yeah,
and obviously mutiny is maybe a bit of an over-exaggeration, but
the break, if you will,
right,
whatever it was.
When did the disconnect happen? I think the Seattle game is a legitimate benchmark.
Mm-hmm. Or was it as simple as, the San Fran beat down and it cast a doubt in everybody's head on both sides of the ball? And then everything changed there.
Right.
Because you're still winning up until that point.
I'll say the Cowboys game, the second one.
Yeah, the game at Dallas. Yeah.
Because remember, prior to that after that Niners game, Bosa was like, "Oh yeah, we figured them out. We put out the blueprint. It's game over for them now, right?" Mm-hmm. And from that point forward, I feel like as a head coach, when that came out and the confidence Bosa spoke with, and I'm not saying Nick Sirianni is listening to a Nick Bosa press conference, but when you felt like they figured you out and you couldn't do anything about it, that should have been your cue to go to the drawing board, or whoever heard it in the building. I'm sure somebody heard it. Mm-hmm. That should have been the cue to say, all right, let's really revisit what we're doing here, because we're getting to a crucial part in the season, and the last thing we want to do is become stale and predictable, and that's exactly what they were. Did you know north of 50% of Jalen Hurts' pass attempts only went to AJ Brown and Devontae Smith? Did you know that?
Yeah, and you can look at that a couple of different ways. Dallas Goedert did miss a good amount of time, but he should have gotten. Remember, they couldn't. At least the first 3 games, they hardly targeted him at all.
I'll say longer than that. They were inconsistent when it came to being able to get him involved. They were very inconsistent, and they almost showed an inability to. At first, it seemed like an unwillingness. That's what it looked like at first, but then it looked like an inability to be able to get it done. Right.
Yeah.
And then also, when it comes to AJ Brown's targets specifically, he had 158 targets. Jalen Hurts had, let me make sure I got this number right. He had 538 attempts. 29%, almost 30% of Jalen Hurts' pass attempts went to AJ Brown. I think that has to change.
Yeah.
I think they need to be more balanced in their offensive attack, and they need to do a better job of getting wide receiver 3 involved, getting their tight end involved. I think they need to improve in that realm because the more options you have on offense, the more unpredictable you become.
Right. And I think that's also on the GM to get Jalen a better 3 and 4 than Olamide Zaccheaus and Quez Watkins. That's not acceptable either. They were terrible with depth this year.
Yes.
At the receiver spot, at the tight end spot, at a bunch of spots on the defensive side of the ball. And that's on the GM. They got to be better, plain and simple. All right, let's step aside. We'll come back. Give you a little NFL stuff, a nice gesture out of a really just awful situation. Update on a couple quarterbacks. Some teams, like the Niners and the Chiefs, who have some really difficult financial situations to deal with. And we will also do our AFC power rankings as well. We will do 10 through 1 with that when we get back. So don't go anywhere. Tone and Rob on this Friday. We are Sports Take. I'm going to tell you right now about Flynn Tree Services. Yes, Flynn Tree Services is an experienced, licensed, and insured Pennsylvania tree services company that will trim or remove any unwanted trees off of your property. They offer cost-effective solutions to any tree problem that you may face, and they are experts at trimming all types of trees. And they serve southeastern Pennsylvania, South Jersey, and northern Delaware. They specialize in tree removal, stump grinding, as well as tree pruning. You could go to their Facebook or Instagram page for more information or a sampling of their work. Give Flynn Tree Services a call at 610-850-2848, 610-850-2848, or online at flynntreeservices.com. That's flynntreeservices.com.